The superhero genre was in desperate need of a shakeup. As a genre, superhero movies and TV shows have an almost oversized presence in modern film discourse. While the caped escapades from Marvel, DC, and other companies have value as cinematic adventures and heartfelt romps, the genre has become very formulaic as of late. Sure, some of these movies and shows like Loki and Shazam fully realize their inherently creative comic book nature, but too many of these adventures, like say Captain Marvel, settle for being solid yet unmemorable. Hell, even some of the more creative shows like WandaVision don't fully commit to their unique premises and instead retread familiar and safe ground. And where these movies and shows could have been interesting, they opt to be reductive and all too conventional. Thankfully, The Suicide Squad upends the superhero genre's generic status quo. While this new DCEU adventure is filled with the ridiculous costumes, outlandish performances, and highly stylized action that exemplifies the superhero genre, The Suicide Squad differs in execution. See, most comic book movies convey similar stylistic tones and visual color palettes that are indistinguishable from one another, but The Suicide Squad feels like a distinct entity separate from those superhero films. Different from most films and shows within the superhero genre, The Suicide Squad is a hilarious, hard R-rated, gory, and foul-mouthed action spectacle with a lot of heart and some very political themes revolving around American interventionism in South America. And yeah, I realize that this sounds like a lot of various disparate ideas thrown inside a cinematic blender, but The Suicide Squad hits its narrative, thematic, and stylistic targets with expert precision. All of its storytelling and stylistic goals land, and as a result, the movie has its own unique identity, allowing it to stand far above all the more standard superhero films plaguing cinemas these days. Make no mistake, it is really damn good. Admittedly though, The Suicide Squad's high quality should not come as a surprise. After all, the film is directed by James Gunn, a man who excels when creating wacky oddball projects. Hell, he has even made other stylistically creative and great superhero projects like the two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and Gunn does the same here with The Suicide Squad. Through Gunn's great direction and his sharp, witty script, The Suicide Squad entertains and enthralls in equal measure. It has some deep themes, but never forgets to make the audience smile at its depraved antics, and due to this, The Suicide Squad is worthy of the price of admission, which is good seeing as the first Suicide Squad movie was absolutely terrible. In fact, it is easily one of the worst movies I've ever sat through in a theater and can easily be described as Category 5 bullshit. Directed by David Ayer and apparently meddled by the studio, 2016's Suicide Squad was a heartless and sloppily put together mess that really tried to copy the quirky style of the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, the 2016 Suicide Squad movie attempted to be a story about bad people redeeming themselves to the tune of a nostalgic soundtrack, but unfortunately 2016's Suicide Squad failed. Despite having similar stylistic furnishings as Guardians of the Galaxy, the movie lacked the personality and artistic finesse present in James Gunn's outer space Marvel blockbusters. Suicide Squad 2016 was a certified train wreck of a film lacking in creative identity and was haphazardly butchered by the studio, a true product rather than an artistic statement. Also, it had Jared Leto's insane clown posse-inspired take on the Joker, which was awful. What the hell was director David Ayer thinking? Anyway, seeing as the first Suicide Squad was an unmitigated disaster of a movie, it makes sense that Warner Brothers would tap James Gunn to direct the new movie. After all, the first Suicide Squad movie was clearly trying to ape the Guardians of the Galaxy style, and if Warner Brothers really wanted to copy Guardians of the Galaxy, then why not just hire the guy who made Guardians of the Galaxy? It only makes sense. James Gunn is obviously very talented and has a very audience-appeasing taste in music, unlike me. Hence why him directing The Suicide Squad is only logical. Through James Gunn, Warner Brothers could at long last get that sweet, sexy Guardians of the Galaxy style of movie that they, for so long, have had a raging hard-on for. They can finally have their James Gunn movie. Yet, with that said, The Suicide Squad is more than just a Guardians of the Galaxy clone. Unlike Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films, his version of The Suicide Squad is an entertaining hard R-rated film that's heavy on expletives and gore, all while being fast and loose with its characters, meaning that these protagonists have a higher tendency to die in gruesome fashion, which is something that really befits the franchise's suicide moniker. And with that, the Suicide Squad, despite some similarities, doesn't see James Gunn retread that familiar Guardians of the Galaxy ground. Sure, there's still some great one-liners, fun group dynamics, a jam-worthy soundtrack, a unique editing style that seemingly abandons typical cinematic storytelling conventions, and some very inventive, elaborate action sequences, but the Suicide Squad is indeed its own entity. It's truly its own mayhemic, out-of-control vehicle with its own pathos and ethos. Far different from the Guardians films, the Suicide Squad is terrific and stands alone. Of course, it would probably help if I described the Suicide Squad's absolutely bonkers story. The plot follows the anti-hero team called the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad are a team of imprisoned supervillains that take on supposedly suicide missions for the US government in order to get their sentences reduced. This movie's roster of Suicide Squad member includes Bloodsport, Harley Quinn, Ratcatcher 2, Peacemaker, King Shark, Flag, and Polka Dot Man. And their latest mission is to infiltrate the fictional South American country of Corto Maltese, a country that very recently experienced a coup and installed a new anti-American government. This is a problem for America because the island is home to a secret superweapon, one so dangerous that it could cause massive death on a colossal scale. And now that the weapon is in the wrong hands, America is in danger. So with that, the Suicide Squad is tasked with entering Corto Maltese and destroying this super weapon before it can harm the world, and more importantly, American citizens, who are indeed the true cream of humanity's crop. That was a little facetious. As you can see, the Suicide Squad is abundantly political in nature. The movie makes a blunt and clear-cut statement about America's imperialist tendencies and my country's need to intervene in the affairs of South American nations. In the real world, the US has tried to interfere with South American governments in the past and has even destabilized them to catastrophic results. And in the Suicide Squad, this unfortunate reality is reflected back at us. The Suicide Squad as a team screw up Corto Maltese with every violent act they commit. In fact, the team are representative of the United States' failed South American interventions here. After all, America's foreign policy is often violent, imbecilic, and always dangerous, which are all descriptors that can describe the Suicide Squad as well. Indeed, the Suicide Squad are the embodiment of American carnage and represent how we are the bad guys, which is kind of nihilistic as far as messaging goes, but it's true. Still, this movie is not meant to be a downer. After all, the Suicide Squad is a fun action romp that actually has a good moral center, despite the anti-heroic nature of its characters. Through its good character development and its thematic messaging, the movie does indeed have a heart. In fact, it posits that even though we live in a messed up world, we can all still try and do our very best to make the planet a better place. In terms of the movie, this means fighting against America's awful South American foreign policy, and in reality, this means continuing to fight on in a grim world that is without hope. Despite how horrid the world can be, the movie tells us that it is worth living in, that it is worth fighting for a better one. The performances further enhance the story and themes. All the characters have their own unique personality traits that make them stand out and be really funny in their own way. Harley Quinn is as fun as ever and has a lot of memorable lines. The Polka Dot Man is psychotic yet understandable. Ratcatcher 2 is very sympathetic and is kind of the heart of the movie. Flag is a soldier by occupation. John Cena really irons out his comedic chops as Peacemaker and has impeccable comedic timing. And King Shark is a walking and somewhat talking shark that eats people, which is pretty awesome for obvious reasons. But the best character is Idris Elba's Bloodsport, who at first seems like a cold-hearted killer with a good sense of humor, but eventually opens up his inner vulnerabilities. Over the course of the movie, he reveals a more noble side, essentially showing all the room he can potentially grow as a character, which in turn allows him to have the best and most impactful arc in the film. Because fitting in with the movie's themes of fighting for a better world, even someone as bad as him can still try to do the right thing every now and then. Furthermore, the heartwarming character interactions show off the Suicide Squad's sense of humanity. Even though Bloodsport, Harley, and the rest are villains, they do have some inner compassion that is quite relatable, and their inner group banter reflects this. While the film has a devilishly dark sense of humor, all of the characters are portrayed with a nuanced air of humanity, even if they are a bit morbid. started, especially with Polka Dot Man of all people. And despite all the bloody violence, the Suicide Squad has a heart worth connecting with, one that is worthy of getting invested in all the stylistic carnage on screen. It is great. If there is one problem, it is that the Suicide Squad's themes can potentially seem somewhat contradictory. After all, the movie criticizes American imperialist violence, yet celebrates the act of killing characters in endlessly gruesome ways, which seems antithetical to the themes. But this doesn't have to be a bad thing. As a piece of genre fare, the movie doesn't need to be the most accurate criticism of US imperialism. It just needs to aim in the right direction and walk the line between being a film that is insightful and a blockbuster that's entertaining, which the movie does expertly. The Suicide Squad is a terrific film all around, whether it be the inventive action, the hilarious script, the animated performances, the inspired editing, or the deeper political themes. The Suicide Squad is awesome, and in a genre filled with uninspired copycats, it's kind of a miracle that such a screwball big budget feature like this was ever greenlit. Like, a movie with this much character and personality does not come around often in the superhero genre. It is rare, and honestly, it's really great that we got to see a Suicide Squad movie with a creative vision. I just hope that movie studios continue to let James Gunn do whatever the hell he wants so that he can further shake up the superhero genre's status quo. And with that, that was the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like rating and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell so that you're notified for whenever I post a new video. Also, leave a comment telling me what you thought about the Suicide Squad, or DCEU movies in general. Additionally, come check out my Patreon. Every dollar helps keep the lights on. The link is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my high-tier patrons and David Devlin and Mom. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.